Crystal chandeliers dangled from the soaring ceiling of the Harrington Hotel, casting a labyrinth of shimmering light across the marble floors. Classical music played gently. Glasses clinked. Guests smiled politely, like everyone had been trained in the art of bowing since birth. Sophie Bennett definitely didn't belong here. She was in full panic mode. Her legs shook, heart pounding, palms slick with sweat, and her brain had only one command: get out. She entered the grand hall in a tight dress, hair in a neat updo, wearing a forced smile. Until she saw him. Logan Pierce, her ex, the worst kind. He stood at the bar, eyes scanning the room like a high-end security camera. He hadn't seen her yet, but Sophie's spine had already frozen. She took a step back, ready to turn and vanish when, "Sophie, you actually came?" Too late. Like instinct, she spun on her heel and ran, not elegantly like a high society woman, but like someone fleeing a crime scene. Her heels clacked loudly against the marble. Heads turned. She scanned for shelter. A white linen-covered table stood in the corner. Two men stood nearby in conversation. One, tall and broad-shouldered in a black suit, had his back turned. Without thinking, Sophie crouched and dove under the table, wedging herself between the tall man's legs. Clutching her dress and biting her lip, she barely breathed. "Please, God, don't let anyone see me." Then came a voice, deep and cold, directly above her head. "What exactly are you looking for down there?" Sophie froze. Slowly, she tilted her head upward and found herself staring straight into a pair of steel-gray eyes beneath the edge of the tablecloth. No surprise, no anger, just an expression that said, "This probably happens to me every week." She let out a weak laugh, awkwardly trying to wriggle out from under the table, not gracefully at all. I was just checking the structural integrity of the table. I'm an architect. Occupational habit." The man didn't move. He just kept staring at her like he could read her entire thought process. His companion frowned and whispered, "Ethan, what's going on?" Ethan? The name hit like a fire alarm in her brain. Ethan Ward, CEO of Ward Innovations, host of the event, and the man she was scheduled to pitch to tomorrow morning for his company's headquarters redesign. Ethan glanced at his assistant and replied coolly, "Nothing, just a stray cat inspecting my table legs." Sophie nearly shot up. "I'm not a cat. I'm a human. And I'm really, really sorry. I'll just go." She stumbled upright, hair a mess, cheeks burning, dress twisted, and of course, she tripped over a chair leg. Ethan caught her wrist before she could faceplant. His hand was cold, firm like granite, but steady. They stood face to face. He was almost a head taller than her, his expression unreadable. Sophie, meanwhile, had no idea where to look. She had just wedged herself between a stranger's legs like a lunatic. "Thank you," she mumbled, yanking her hand back. "I'll go inspect more tables now." Ethan raised an eyebrow. For the first time, the corner of his mouth tugged upward, not quite a smile, but no longer ice. "Good luck with your inspections." Sophie turned and practically fled. In her head, one thought echoed on repeat. "Oh my God, is there anything more humiliating than this?" Across the room, Ethan still watched as her silhouette disappeared. His assistant asked, "Who was she?" Ethan took a sip of his drink and replied casually, "The first woman in my life to ever get between my legs." The next morning, Sophie Bennett stood in front of the towering glass building of Ward Innovations, clutching a portfolio in one hand and a chestnut latte in the other, the only thing strong enough to keep her awake after last night's disaster. Pull it together, Sophie. Yesterday was a fluke. No one recorded it. Today's a fresh day, a serious pitch. You're going to handle it professionally, gracefully, and under no circumstances will you crawl under another table. She walked into the sleek lobby in a light gray suit, head high and determined. A receptionist guided her to the 27th floor, where internal design reviews were held. Sophie took a deep breath, stood at the door, and stepped in. And then, life hit her again. At the head of the table, in a crisp white shirt, casually spinning a fountain pen between his fingers, sat Ethan Ward. Sophie froze. Ethan didn't look surprised. His eyes traveled to her red heels, the same ones from last night. "Oh," he said evenly. "Table inspector, version 2.0. Her cheeks flushed scarlet, but she held her ground. "Today, I'm here to test the limits of client patience." Ethan's assistant let out a quiet chuckle, quickly stifled when Ethan shot him a look. He folded his arms, leaned back in his chair, eyes sharp as glass. "My office needs creativity, not circus acts." Sophie smiled, calm but unwavering. "Perfect. I'm an architect, not a mood manager for CEOs." The temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. Ethan didn't respond right away. Then, his mouth twitched, like he couldn't decide whether to laugh or cancel the contract. "Go ahead," he said, "as long as your designs don't require me to crawl under anything to assess them." Sophie nodded and opened her folder. She presented clearly, confidently, mixing just the right amount of professional insight with dry humor. "I'd recommend greenery in the reception area to make it feel more welcoming. Right now, it's more like an emotional quarantine zone." Ethan flipped through the drawings, his face unreadable, but his eyes paused slightly on one panel, a quiet window seat with silver-gray curtains and soft natural light. "This wasn't in the original brief. I added it," Sophie said. "Some things matter even if they're not in the contract, like giving your team a quiet place to breathe, especially when their boss is emotionally frozen." Ethan was silent. No nod, no reaction. But everyone in the room felt it, the way he looked at her in that moment. Irritated? Maybe. Intrigued? Definitely. "Do you do that often?" She turned around. "Do what?" "Ruin your first impression with a potential client by crawling between his legs." "No," Sophie said, her tone cool. "That was a one-time promotional offer." Ethan tilted his head slightly, his expression not mocking, just curious. "I'm asking, do you always talk like that?" "I'm not arguing, just offering perspective. If you're looking for someone who nods at everything you say, I'm not her." He stepped closer, closer than necessary for a conversation. Sophie didn't flinch, though her eyes widened. A subtle scent of mint and sandalwood lingered from him, and she swallowed involuntarily. "I don't like people who are too obedient," Ethan said slowly. "But I despise unprofessionalism." "Lucky for you, I've got just the right mix to drive you crazy," she replied, flashing a dazzling smile. This time, Ethan laughed, really laughed, more clearly than before. "All right, the project starts next week. I'll personally oversee it." Sophie blinked. "You'll supervise it yourself?" "I want to make sure I won't have to crawl under the table again just to check your designs." As Sophie walked out of the room, she exhaled in relief, then lightly smacked her forehead. Why did I sass him like that? And why am I already looking forward to the next time? Since the presentation, no one could deny Sophie Bennett had left an impression. Within 3 days, whispers filled the design department. The girl who crawled under the table didn't just survive her encounter with Ethan Ward, she had actually made him stop spinning his pen and pay attention. "Ethan looked at her like he was trying to decode a weird physics formula," someone whispered in the elevator. Another employee burst out laughing. "She called him the server room because he's always cold. I nearly choked on my tea." And the surprising thing was, Ethan did nothing to deny it. Not because he didn't know. He knew. He heard. He passed by Sophie's desk during lunch breaks, always coincidentally. "What are you having?" he asked once, his tone casual, but his eyes oddly focused. "Chicken rice." "Does that influence your design judgment?" she replied without even looking up. He nodded slightly, then walked away. The next day, at a cafe near the office where Sophie liked to sketch, Ethan showed up. He didn't speak, just sat at the table beside hers, opened his laptop. When the barista asked for his order, Sophie overheard. "Black coffee, low sugar." "Interesting," she turned to him, squinting playfully. "You come here often?" "No." "Then why this place?" "Close to the office." He paused. "And close to you." Sophie nearly choked. She laughed. "Maybe it's just a coincidence." Ethan glanced up. "I don't believe in coincidence." "Well, you've worn a white shirt every day this week. Coincidence or laundry shortage?" He looked down at his shirt, slightly flustered. It was the first time she saw him, mildly off guard. That evening, Sophie took a walk in the park after work. She was doodling ideas in her notebook when a tall shadow blocked her sunlight. "You again?" She looked up. Ethan stood there in a light gray shirt, holding a coffee cup. No tie, no laptop, no assistant. "I needed space to think," he said. "And yet you ended up at the exact park I go to?" Sophie tilted her head, her lips quirking. "Maybe it's a new habit forming. Or maybe you like punishing yourself with my judgmental gaze." He gave the faintest smile. No denial. A few days later, back at the office, someone whispered, "Mr. Ward just asked what Sophie's having for lunch." "No way," Sophie overheard, smiled, and sipped her tea. "The iceberg," she said almost to herself, "is starting to melt." Friday, 5 p.m. The office of Ward Innovations exhaled collectively after a long week. But on the 27th floor, inside a quiet meeting room, Ethan Ward sat by the window, staring at an unsent message. "Would you like to have dinner with me?" He typed, deleted, typed again, deleted again. Eventually he stood, grabbed his coat, and headed straight to the design department. Sophie was packing up sketches, one earbud in, mumbling along to a movie soundtrack. She looked up as Ethan stepped in, unannounced. "Something wrong?" she asked, smiling casually. Ethan nodded slowly. "Have you had dinner?" Sophie blinked, surprised. "Not yet, but is that an invitation?" "There's a quiet Italian place, no assistants, no meetings." He met her gaze directly. "Not business, not obligation." "You mean, I want to go on a date with you." Silence. The room might as well have held its breath. Sophie stared at him for a moment, then chuckled, not loudly, but sincerely. A sweet laugh, tinged with sadness. "Sorry," she said softly. "I'm allergic to people who don't know how to smile." Ethan didn't flinch, didn't get upset, but something in his eyes cracked, just a little. And yet he remained perfectly composed. "I'm not good at showing emotion," he said, "but I'm serious." "I know, and I'm serious too when I say I can't open up to someone I can't read." She gently raised her hand and pointed at his forehead. "Right here, blank. No joy, no sadness, no frustration, nothing. I need someone alive." Ethan looked at her like she was a blueprint too complicated to decode. "So what do you want?" he asked. "I want someone who laughs because of me. Someone who looks at me and really sees me. Not a man whose default expression is a frown." His fingers curled slightly, but he didn't step forward. She didn't step back. They stood across from each other, one still learning emotion, the other unwilling to live without it. "Thanks for asking," Sophie said gently. "Really? But I think we're better the way we are now. Me teasing, you catching. Kind of fun, don't you think?" Ethan said nothing. She stepped back, still holding her sketch bag, her eyes still bright, but her voice quieter. "Don't look sad, okay? Because if you do, I might change my mind, and I can't afford to love someone who's still figuring out how to feel." Then she walked away, leaving Ethan standing alone in the soft golden wash of the sunset streaming through the glass. No accusations. no drama. Just a soft, sincere no. But somehow, it lingered longer than a goodbye. Tuesday night. Rain tapped gently on the windows. Sophie Bennett's apartment glowed dimly with kitchen light, but on the couch she lay curled like a leftover sandwich wrapped in a thin blanket. She sneezed for the 11th time. "No way," she groaned, dragging the tissue box closer. Her nose was blocked, her eyes stung, and her head throbbed. She reached for her laptop to tweak the latest draft for Ward Innovations headquarters design, but her vision was blurry, her energy gone. She shut the lid. Tomorrow, if I survive tonight. Her phone buzzed. Ethan Ward. She coughed, answered. "I just sent the final scan." "You're sick," his voice came through, low and firm. "What? No, I'm fine." "You sound like you're talking through 3 blankets. You have a fever." "I'm okay. I've got meds, ginger tea, and a very loyal box of tissues." "What's your address?" "Wait, hold on." Click. 15 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Sophie shuffled to the door, wrapped in her blanket, nose red, hair a mess, tissue in hand. Standing outside was Ethan Ward, coat damp from rain, holding a paper bag. "You haven't eaten, right?" he asked, calm as ever. "You actually came?" she stammered. "You know how to cook congee?" "No," he said. "I bought instant congee. Tried to cook it. Might be a little burnt, but it's food." She stood frozen. He stepped in, placed the bag down, and began ladling congee into a bowl. 10 minutes later, they sat across from each other in her tiny kitchen. Sophie ate spoonfuls of slightly charred congee. Ethan quietly poured her some water, the silence not awkward, just still. "I didn't think the coldest man in the company would be the one making porridge at 9 p.m., she said, voice hoarse. He looked at her, his eyes softened a shade. "You think I don't have emotions?" "No, I think you hide them better than the National Gold Reserve." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "I'm not used to soft things, but I'm learning, bit by bit." Sophie smiled. Her eyes were watery, part flu, part something deeper. "You've made progress," she whispered. "Big bonus point." That night, Ethan stayed until she fell asleep on the couch. Before leaving, he gently adjusted her blanket, fixed her pillow, and stepped out quietly. The soft golden lamp behind him cast a faint glow across his face, and for the first time, it changed. A smile, small, fragile, but real. Sophie wasn't the type to invite her boss out for dinner, especially not one like Ethan Ward. But after that night, the congee, the silence, the gentle act of staying, she knew some things needed to be said, the right way, at the right moment. Friday, 5:15 p.m., she sent him a message. "Dinner's on me tonight. No meetings, no slide decks. Just a thank you, and no congee, promise." His reply came in under a minute. "I accept, if the thank you comes with carbonara." She smiled. They met at a small Italian restaurant tucked into Capitol Hill. Their table sat by the window, soft amber lighting draping over them like a warm throw blanket. Ethan arrived early. Sophie stepped in a few minutes later, trench coat wrapped loosely around her, hair tied up, her face still touched by traces of a recent cold, but her smile was bright. "Ordered yet?" she asked, taking a seat. "Waiting for you," he replied. "Last time was congee. I figured you'd want to upgrade." "Then let's do mushroom pizza and carbonara," she grinned. They ate, talked, no work, just little things. TV shows they never finished, a new cafe down the street, the weird squeaky chair in the break room. When the meal ended, Sophie reached for the bill. Ethan raised a brow. "I can get this." "No," she said firmly. "This dinner is for me to say thank you, and I mean it." She sat straighter, met his eyes. "Thank you for showing up, for making congee, even slightly burnt, for staying until I fell asleep without needing to say anything. Ethan only nodded, eyes soft, no longer cold. "I know you're not used to showing emotion," she continued, "but that night, you didn't have to say anything. You already did more than enough." He set his glass down, leaned forward slightly. Then, "If I wanted to say something tonight, would you want to hear it?" She paused, then nodded. He inhaled. "I don't know when this started. Maybe when you called me the server room, or the time you handed me a tissue box instead of a thank you. But I know I've been waiting for someone like you, not because you changed me, but because you made me want to change. For myself? For you?" Silence. Then Sophie leaned in and kissed him, soft, unhurried, no explanations, just a woman who listened and a man who finally dared to feel. When she pulled back, her voice was gentle. "That's my answer." Ethan looked at her, something flickering in his eyes. The next morning, the top floor of Ward Innovations felt like it had been touched by spring. But there was only one person who didn't notice, the one who had brought that spring with her. Ethan Ward, the famously cold CEO with a poker face that once terrified an entire legal department, now sat in his office smiling to himself. It wasn't a polite smile. It wasn't the satisfaction of closing a major deal. It was a real smile, soft as a breeze, warm as sunlight, and it kept returning, again and again. He rested his chin on his hand, staring blankly at the screen in front of him, not reading a single word. From time to time, his fingers brushed against his lips, the place where Sophie had kissed him the day before. "She actually kissed me," he whispered, and smiled again. His assistant walked in and nearly dropped the latte at the sight. "Mr. Ward, are you—" Ethan looked up, eyes gentle. The assistant quickly backed out of the room, face pale, whispering into their phone. "Guys, the boss is smiling, and not because he closed a deal. I think he's been poisoned by love." Ethan didn't know what was happening to him. He zoned out during meetings, didn't get angry when reports were in the wrong format, didn't explode when a supplier delayed an order. Instead, his thoughts wandered. What is she doing now? Has Sophie had breakfast? Should I ask her out for a walk tonight? And every time he remembered Sophie's smile after the kiss, his heart beat, softly but genuinely. So, this is love. That afternoon, the office felt quieter than usual. Sophie had just stepped out of the project meeting, arms full of design drafts, her face smudged after an intense revision session. She had no idea that, down in the main lobby, a powerful woman was waiting for her. "Excuse me? Are you Sophie Bennett?" The voice was deep, clear, and sharp as a blade. Sophie looked up and instantly straightened her posture, as if someone had tugged her spine upright. In front of her stood a woman dressed in elegant attire, hair swept into a perfect chignon, face striking and stern, her gaze cold enough to cut glass. "Yes, I'm Sophie. And you are—" The woman gave a slight nod. "I'm Margaret Ward." Time seemed to freeze. Margaret Ward, Ethan's mother, honorary chairwoman, the woman behind the entire Ward Innovations empire, famous for her iron discipline and absolute control. And now she was standing in front of Sophie, unannounced, not by chance, clearly by design. "Could you spare a few minutes? I'd like to speak with you in private." They sat in a quiet tea lounge on the 34th floor. 2 cups of steaming black tea were served. Margaret didn't touch hers. She sat straight, her eyes scanning Sophie like a mislabeled package, calm, cold, and razor-sharp. "I'll be direct," she began, her voice clear and steel-edged. "I know you're involved with my son." Sophie tensed slightly, but maintained a polite smile. "Ethan and I just work together, Mrs. Ward." You know I'm not talking about work. Margaret crossed her legs, hands perfectly clasped in her lap. I've seen too many young, clever women try to latch onto powerful men. You're no different. Sophie went silent for a moment, not out of fear, but because it hurt. And what do you think I'm after? Status, Margaret said bluntly. You're a talented architect, I'll give you that. But talent doesn't equate to position. My family has standards. Ethan has obligations. Sophie looked down at her tea, not out of shame, but to collect herself. And does Ethan know about these obligations? He's a smart man, but intelligence doesn't make one immune to delusions or emotions. That softness makes people forget who they are. Margaret opened her handbag, pulled out a thick envelope, and placed it on the table. This is an invitation from the Blackwood family. Valerie, their daughter, just returned from Europe, studied art and business, a perfect combination. Tio, Sophie stared at the envelope as if it were a sealed sentence. Margaret remained composed, every word deliberate. You can't offer Ethan what Valerie can: influence, pedigree, the ideal public image for an heir. You may have feelings, but this goes beyond feelings. Sophie let out a quiet laugh, a closed-lip smile, bittersweet, but not broken. And what about love? What do you think of that? Margaret exhaled, lightly, almost mockingly. Love is for novels and movies. In real life, it comes after legacy, duty, and reputation. Sophie stood. Her eyes were still bright, but her voice dropped, steady, slow, and resolute. That's unfortunate, Mrs. Ward, because I'm not here to fight for Ethan's heart. If that's something that needs to be won through calculation, I don't want it. But I also won't let anyone tell me I'm unworthy, just because of where I come from. Margaret narrowed her eyes. I won't stop you, but I trust you're wise enough to know your limits, and to avoid destroying your future, or Ethan's. The next morning, when Ethan walked into the office, he found his mother already waiting in the small conference room. We need to talk, she said crisply. She handed him an elegant envelope. The Blackwood family has invited you to dinner. Valerie, the girl I mentioned, tonight, 7 p.m. Ethan didn't touch the envelope. He looked at his mother, his voice calm but firm. I thought you stopped arranging matches for me. I'm not forcing, I'm scheduling. You can decline. But remember, Valerie is the right choice, not just for you, but for the future of Ward Innovations. Ethan sat up straighter, and each word that left his mouth sounded like a declaration. Mother, I'm in love with Sophie. The air turned ice cold. Margaret froze for a second, as if she'd misheard. She doesn't belong in this world, Ethan. You know that. Ethan stood, picked up the envelope, and set it gently back on the table. I know, and that's exactly why I need to stand beside her. Ethan! I've lived all these years doing what's right, Mother, but I've never been happy. She had built empires, brokered deals across continents, and bent CEOs to her will, but she had failed to bend her son. And now, the girl she deemed unworthy had done what she never could, make him choose with his heart. She didn't know how to lose, especially not to a girl from a different world, and especially not to the one who now held her son's heart. After being rejected so clearly by her own son, Margaret Ward realized that her advice, her commands, and her carefully laid arrangements no longer held sway over Ethan. She had lost control, and that's when she reached for her final weapon, a twisted version of the truth. 2 weeks later, on a golden Sunday afternoon, Sophie attended a local architectural showcase hosted by the Design Association. She arrived with a few former colleagues, wearing a cream linen dress, sketchpad in hand. The atmosphere was relaxed. Her design for Ward Innovations' new headquarters was nearly complete. Ethan had even become almost pleasant. They weren't officially dating, but the way he looked at her each morning, it wasn't just business anymore. What Sophie didn't know was that, a few blocks away, A quiet storm was brewing. Margaret Ward, Ethan's mother, had been watching. She never protested openly, never raised her voice. But she had never accepted Sophie. She believed in preserving the system, a system where women like Sophie, without pedigree or social stature, were dangerous to legacy. And when distance, subtle disapproval, and polite walls failed, she turned to something else: manipulation. At the exhibit, Sophie was admiring a glass-structured model when a voice called out from behind. "Sophie, got a minute?" She turned. Logan Pierce, her ex, the liar, the thief. "What are you doing here?" she said flatly. "Pure coincidence," he grinned. "I just want to talk, just this once." Sophie didn't want a scene. She stepped aside toward a quieter corner. She had no idea that mounted to the nearby lamppost, a small camera was recording. Inside a black car parked across the street, Margaret's assistant was watching. Logan stepped closer, pretending to take her hand. Then he pulled her into a quick hug. Sophie stiffened, pushed him away immediately, her face furious. But the video had what it needed. A photo was captured at the perfect second before she pushed him away and sent out. Monday morning, Ethan received an anonymous email. "Do you really think she loves you?" Attached were two images, one from afar, Sophie and Logan standing close, one close-up, Logan hugging her, her face unreadable. Ethan frowned. Not enough. But a few minutes later, another email came, this time a video, a 40-second clip, Logan taking Sophie's hand, hugging her. The video cut off before she pushed him. Ethan sat still. His hand clenched the mouse. His eyes didn't blink, but his mind raced, heart questioning what his brain refused to believe. She wouldn't, right? But then, why? Still, he said nothing. All day, Sophie had no idea. But she felt something shift. Ethan had gone cold. Distant. In the tech review meeting, he barely looked at her. The morning glance was gone. So were the lunch questions. That night, Sophie texted him, "You seem distant today. Is something wrong?" His reply came minutes later. "I'm fine." She knew. He wasn't. The next morning, Sophie stepped into the elevator at Ward Innovations, just like any other day. But the moment the door slid shut, she felt the eyes. Some stared outright. Some pretended to be glued to their phones. Someone covered their mouth and giggled in whispers. Her heart tightened as if pricked by invisible thorns. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Then a private message popped up on her screen. From the HR secretary. "You should see this before going upstairs." Sophie clicked the link. Dozens of photos and messages were circulating across the company's internal network. The headline hit like venom. The CEO's gold-digging designer thought it was love. Turns out it was a lie. Photos from the gallery event, cropped at the exact moment Logan Pierce pulled her close. Fake messages, nearly identical to what Ethan had once received. The comments section had exploded. A few defended her, but most whispered about abuse of power, sleeping with the boss to get ahead, hypocrisy behind the pretty face. Sophie closed the screen, took a deep breath. On the top floor, the CEO's office door was shut. She didn't need an appointment. She walked in. Ethan stood facing the window, back to the door. He didn't turn when he heard her footsteps. "You've seen it all, haven't you?" she asked. Silence. "I didn't do it. Everything they're saying, it's fake." Still silence. "Logan showed up out of nowhere. I had no idea someone was filming. You don't believe me, do you?" Ethan finally turned. His face was calm, too calm, and that scared her more than any rage would have. "I didn't say I don't believe you," he said quietly. "But you didn't say you do," she whispered, her voice breaking. He looked at her for a few seconds, then turned away as if he couldn't face her eyes or his own heart. "I see," Sophie murmured. "You don't need to say anything. Your silence hurts more than any accusation." Ethan's hand clenched slightly, but he said nothing. Sophie looked at him one last time, not to hold on, but to let go. That afternoon, she submitted her resignation from the Ward Innovations Project. No tears, no outburst, just a simple document, closing a chapter with the dignity of a heart shattered in silence. That night, Ethan Ward sat alone in his top-floor office. The building darkened floor by floor as departments shut down, but his light stayed on. On his desk was the nearly complete headquarters blueprint, Sophie's design. His hand rested on the detail of a quiet window seat. His eyes paused on a small handwritten note in purple ink. "Rest corner, even leaders need a place to breathe." He closed his eyes, and then the thought struck like a distant bell. This isn't Sophie. His Sophie didn't meet exes behind closed doors. She didn't hide, didn't lie. She lived in the way she drew, every line precise, intentional. She wasn't perfect, but she was honest. And he, the man who once ran a tech empire built on verification and data, had never even thought to verify. The next morning, Ethan summoned the internal security team. "Trace the IP addresses of the anonymous emails," he ordered. "I want original metadata on the video, the images, everything." No one asked why. They got to work. 48 hours later, the results landed on his desk. Every breadcrumb pointed to one place, the personal laptop of Margaret Ward's assistant. The photo and video software license was linked to a law firm formerly employed by the Blackwood family, the same family Margaret had once tried to pair him with. Ethan sat frozen, not from betrayal, but because the person behind it all was his mother. He turned to the scale model Sophie had crafted. A simple house, big windows, a small garden, and a tiny plaque on the door. "No need to knock, just come in." It felt like a message made for him, the man who closed every door just when he needed to open his heart. "You trusted me, and I didn't have the courage to trust you back." It wouldn't end in silence again. 2 days later, Ethan stepped onto the main conference hall stage at Ward Innovations. No PR team, no legal filters, just a live internal broadcast, company-wide. Press were in attendance. Ethan wore a muted gray suit, eyes calm but no longer cold. "Good afternoon, I'm Ethan Ward." He paused for a few seconds. "Lately, there have been many rumors about my work, my personal life, and my role at this company. Today, I'm not here to defend or blame. I'm only here to say this." He looked straight into the camera, voice steady, deep, unwavering. "I love Sophie Bennett. I doubted her. I hurt her, and I regret that deeply. But from this day forward, I will never choose anyone because of pressure, image, or power. And if Ward Innovations cannot accept a successor who loves with his heart, then I have no reason to remain in this position. I hereby resign." Silence swallowed the room. But in a small apartment, a woman sat quietly, staring at her phone, tears streaming down her cheeks. Sophie placed a hand over her heart and whispered, "At last, you chose to stand by me." That morning, Seattle's sky was brushed with soft, silvery clouds. Sophie's new studio had been open for just 2 weeks. It was a modest space, a converted attic floor with wooden floors, sunlight pouring through linen curtains, and a little sign at the door. "Bennett Studio, where ideas breathe." Sophie arrived early. She loved the quiet before everyone came in, just the hum of the coffee machine and the golden light cutting across her drafting table. Today, she planned to finish her design for a new community playground up north. She had no idea Ethan Ward was already downstairs. He'd come early, holding not flowers, not gifts, but a roll of blueprints. As he climbed the narrow stairs, each step felt heavier than the last. He wasn't sure she'd open the door. wasn't sure he deserved it, but he knew he had to try. Inside, Sophie was adjusting a model when the doorbell chimed. She looked up. Her heart skipped half a beat when she saw the figure behind the frosted glass. She opened the door. Ethan stood there, no tie, no armor, just a man holding a drawing as if he were holding his own heart. "I'm not here to explain," he said, voice low. "I came to give you this." He unrolled the paper. It was a house, not a headquarters, not a luxury estate, just a small house with a backyard, tall windows, and a long wooden bench under the porch. There was even space on the wall for sketch hooks. "I drew it," Ethan said, "after revisiting every line you drew for me." Sophie said nothing. She stepped closer, her fingers grazing the edges of the sketch. "Not entirely logical," she murmured. "Lighting ratio's a little off." "I didn't draw it for a grade," he said. "I drew it to say, I'm sorry." They stood close now. Words no longer needed. Everything was in the drawing: apology, honesty, and a wish to begin again, this time with feeling. "I don't love well with words," Ethan added quietly, "but I'm learning to love with action." Sophie looked into his eyes. The ones that were once steel now held depth, warmth. Something had changed, not just in his gaze, but in the way he allowed her to truly see him. "Would you like me to revise a few details?" she asked, still holding the sketch. Ethan smiled faintly. "I was hoping you would." One breath later, Sophie pulled him into a tight embrace. For a second, Ethan didn't move. Then slowly, he let his arms wrap around her, not with hesitation, but with the relief of a man finally finding home. No more explanations. Just this. They had found each other again, not in contracts or architecture, but in a blueprint drawn with vulnerability and no conditions.